All right, guys. Sorry I couldn't be there today. So hopefully you are sitting there right now and listening to this wonderful Ed puzzle flip, and let's get after it. So as you remember from Mr. Winter's flips, after the end of the Persian Wars, the Greeks had turned themselves into a league that we call the Delian League. And Athens had dominated that league, and then Sparta kind of gets upset because Athens is using all the money to pay to rebuild their city and all that. And what's going to happen is a bunch of friction is going to be caused between the two city states, and we'll get to that in a second. But before we get to the conflict that's going to erupt between Athens and Sparta, we need to first look at how the time period between the end of the Persian Wars and the beginning of the Peloponnesian War is going to be a time period where Athens dominates the Aegean world. Athens becomes the big dog on the block. And during this time, we're going to see, most importantly, that democracy itself becomes much more accessible to many more people in Athens. And as we remember when we talked about the time period of Cleisthenes, democracy was good as it was developed, but it kind of had some rough edges. So what we're going to see is during the time period we call the Age of Pericles, because the great Athenian statesman whose name is Pericles is going to lead them towards a better democracy. During the period between 460 and 424 BC, we call this time period, we name it after him and call it the Age of Pericles. And really the big idea that comes about during this time in Athens is what we call direct democracy. Direct democracy pretty much is an evolution of a more just democracy practiced in Athens. So we see it's when a large number of citizens take part in day-to-day government. And so this statesman Pericles is going to convince the bull and then convince the ecclesia to pass a bunch of reforms to open up that decision-making process to more people. So I just want to go through some of these reforms of the great statesman Pericles. First of all, he's going to institute that the assembly is going to meet even more times a month than they already do. They're going to meet more often, even on the Pnyx Hill, to make decisions, the ecclesia, the assembly. So that's a big idea. So even more times to vote on things. He's also going to say that all male citizens can join in the debate, meaning that he's actually going to say that you didn't have to own land, you just had to be born in Athens. Okay, so you have to be an Athenian citizen and a male, but it's going to take away that prerequisite that you had to own a business or own a farm. So that's going to mean more people can participate. He also is going to make it so that 6,000 citizens need to be present for big decisions, so that like a small group of people can't just meet at certain times of the month and pass laws that might affect all Athenian people, all Athenian citizens. So he sets what's called a quorum, that there's a certain number of people, when it's like a big decision like going to war, raising taxes, etc., you have to have a minimum number of people around to make that decision. The biggest thing he probably does, though, is, as we remember, even if you were chosen by lot to serve on the Council of 500, the bull, you usually, if you were a poor farmer or a poor business owner, you wouldn't be able to do it because you couldn't take a year off from your business because you needed to make a living. And you would basically sell that office to probably a noble or an aristocrat, and it kind of defeats the purpose of people-centered government. So Pericles is going to institute what's called a stipend, which is basically a payment for serving in your year of office so that you can now be part of the bull. And if you win the lot, you can actually serve for a whole year, regardless of your finances. So that's a really big idea. Also, too, we're going to see the development of ancient juries, like a jury of your peers, as opposed to a judge making decisions on your innocent or guilt. And again, like with the Council of 500, that's chosen by lot. So that's a big deal, to allow citizens to say that other citizens are innocent or guilty of a crime. Again, much more democratic. And last but not least, they're going to institute an idea we call ostracism, that every year the Athenian people are going to get together, the citizens, and they're going to pick one citizen to kick out of Athens for 10 years. Anybody who has too much influence, anybody who has too much of a chance to maybe overthrow the democracy, to become a tyrant, they'd all vote, and you can see in your book they have a picture actually. They'd have a little thing they'd write a name on, and they'd all vote. And if your name came up the most, you got kicked out of Athens for 10 years. And the idea was that when you came back, you wouldn't have any more influence. So you want to definitely know. I think the bottom three are some of the bigger things that happen in the age of Pericles to allow more people to directly take part, I should say, in democracy. Also, too, under Pericles' leadership, Athens is going to become a superpower. But more importantly, too, it's going to become the cultural center of the Mediterranean world because they like things like poetry and learning, and Sparta doesn't like that stuff. So he's going to make Athens this great cultural center where all the great artists, writers, thinkers are all going to come to Athens and make it this great center of culture in the ancient world. So that's another great thing Pericles does. Unfortunately, though, a bad decision Pericles is going to make is to go to war with Sparta. And we're going to see this war is going to cause the Greek city states to fracture and weaken. And even though they showed how strong they could be together, they're not going to be able to hold together their alliances. And they're going to pave the way for a big power in the north to take them over. But here you can see Pericles. And then here we see Athens, the Acropolis, the city down here. And then here we see Pericles giving a famous oration during the Peloponnesian War to his people in Athens. Let's talk about this war. So the Peloponnesian War is basically a Greek civil war. As we've established, the Delian League came about after the Persian Wars, but it begins to fall apart as Athens kind of bullies the other city-states, and Sparta's had enough. They go and form their own league, remember. They form their own league called the Peloponnesian League. So these two opposing forces of city-states who are going to not like one another. In 431 BC, the Peloponnesian League is going to declare war on the Delian League. Sparta is going to lead an invasion of Athens. And back and forth for the next 20 some odd years, Sparta and their city states that are loyal to them, and Athens and their city state that are loyal to them, are going to fight a hugely bloody, angry war with one another. A terrible war. Actually, during the siege of Athens, in the initial part of the war, a plague actually breaks out because so many people went into the city. And actually, the great statesman Pericles that we just talked about dies. So again, this war goes back and forth for about 27 years. Huge atrocities committed on both sides. Really tough war. And in the end, in 404 BC, Sparta will defeat Athens. But think of how bad this is. They actually ally with the Persian navy to take out Athens because Sparta had a strong army, Athens had a strong navy. They couldn't beat each other. So Sparta enlists the Persians. Think of how far they've fallen from the great unification of the Persian War. Now they hate each other so much that a bunch of non-Greeks are invited by the Spartans to help take out a bunch of other Greeks. Just a terrible, terrible war. But again, Sparta does win. But in a show of respect, the Spartans do not destroy Athens, even though the Persians want to burn it to the ground. The Spartans say, well, no, they are Greek. We've beat them. So let's not do that. So let's get into some outcomes, and then we'll call it a day. So what are some aftermath of the Peloponnesian War? Well, number one, obviously, it ends the Athenian domination of Greece. The Spartans crush them. Sparta now is ascendant; they are the big dog, and Athens now loses its Aegean empire, if you will. After that, Athens falls on hard times. Democracy begins to get corrupted because people feel it let them down in the war. That Pericles convinced them to be too democratic. You're going to get another age of tyrants and what we call demagogues, people who use their sweet words to convince people to give up their rights and powers and things like that. So Athens just starts to pretty much decline. Democracy, as I said, becomes corrupted. Sparta is a big dog for a little while, but they can't help themselves. They start to abuse people around Greece, and they'll fight a giant war with Thebes. Thebes will win, then Thebes will dominate, but then Thebes will fight a war with Corinth. And now all the Greek city-states are back to just squabbling and killing and murdering one another. And it's like they showed that together they could be so great, but they're just like siblings. They just can't help themselves. They just can't get along. And in the end, it really harms them. By 359 BC, these fractured, dysfunctional city states are going to be on the verge of being conquered by a growing power in the north under their king Philip II. This is an area called Macedon. And Philip II is going to take advantage of the squabbling little Greek city states, and he is going to conquer them. And then his son Alexander is going to become the greatest conqueror, and ironically, though, the greatest spreader of Greek civilization that we will see as he conquers the whole Persian Empire. But we're going to deal with that when we get back from Christmas break. Again, that's pretty much it on the Peloponnesian War. I've also included a timeline that you can look through to kind of get an idea of all the things that are going on. It's much more detailed than what I just get into. But again, I hope you guys had a good day today. And again, make sure that you are going back and relearning any of this you need to relearn. I'll answer a few questions on it on Monday when I see you, but we're going to move right on in to Greek culture. All right. Have a good one, guys. Have a good weekend.